Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest in the IDEX Legal digital series. It's kind of a work we've been doing for the last 1 month for the legal community. So while we're not allowed to be, while we're not in the phase of doing physical events for the community, we're still ideating and curating conversations online to keep the law firm, the judiciary, and the kind of in-house community engaged on important conversations. I'm really excited today to be having Nilanjan from ICICI, Jagrati from Refinitiv, Jigar from KKR, and Navneet from Cisco as part of this important conversation, really looking at what role COVID and the lockdown is having on accelerating trends for the in-house community. We've seen in the last decade or so that the role of GC has, there's seen a real paradigm shift. So when we started in 2010 already as IDEX Legal, there was always a complaint about the role of a GC, which back then was a very new term, wasn't taken seriously at all by the business. And there was this constant kind of, we want to be at the table, we want to be taken seriously, we want to be part of the business conversation. We fast forward a decade, and in most organizations, especially the MNC and large Indian houses, the role of the GC, is very, very important to business. And the GC and the in-house department play a critical role in business decision making now. And we can see that trend is accelerating faster in India. I think it's evolving faster than now law firms are, in my opinion. And really, it's just now looking at, does this kind of lockdown phase where we're all working from home, it's tougher to get to the office, what kind of impact is that having, on these trends that were coming at us anyway? So I really want to kickstart from a kind of high level bird's eye view kind of point on, what impact, are you as a panel seeing within the business? What is, the lockdown, what is it doing to your department, the way you work with your teams? Even looking at, their kind of mental wellness, for example. So, Jag, let me start with you in terms of, what is that, what kind of role that's having, on the way you work as a, in-house department.
Vikas, was that for me?
Yes, Jagrati, it's for you.
Thanks, Vikas. Can you be a little bit louder? Sorry.
I will. So really looking at what impact is that the role of, what is the lockdown and COVID? What impact is that having, on the in-house department at the moment?
I think the primary focus for all of us is to ensure that there's empathy more than anything else. Because I think as an organization, we've focused on the well-being of employees. All work can wait. Work is important. But I think ensuring that the leadership is communicating enough, keeping the workforce engaged. We're ensuring that our teams are motivated, they're in good spirits, they're taken care of. They need to know that there is trust, there is a huge care, concern, empathy that's going out from whether it's a manager to the team, whether it's from leadership to the organization as a whole.
Just getting Jagrati back, let's move that over to Nilanjan, for example, to look at moving on from what Jagrati was saying about the role of the leaders, much more about empathy, well-being, trust. How do you do that in a kind of virtual world? Because when you're in the office, you've got, you can interact with people, you see them daily basis. How do you do that from from a virtual point of view?
Thanks, Vikas, and good afternoon, everyone. And Vikas, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a panelist here. I am not a general counsel, so this size here is only for general counsel. I'm only a head of legal, so I can say what I want.
You've done the GC role before, so you have, but
So So to the point, I think the largest, again, I don't know whether it's specific to legal department as such, but I think specific to organizations. I mean, it's general to all organizations. I think what is really going to change, and to me the paradigm shift is the onus on leadership. The onus which is going to have on leadership has been more than anything and more than ever before. I think we'll have to think about, as leaders, particularly whether it's your leader in the legal team or a leader in an organization, you got to think about yourself no longer as a peacetime leader, but you got to think about yourself as a wartime leader. You got to think about yourself as that. Right now, I think more than any time earlier, leaders will have to act with full knowledge. Leaders will have to act with knowledge of facts. So they'll have to, ensure that the decisions, they've got full facts. They got to bring in all their experience they have to be able to have an appreciation of consequences. They have. So I think that is the largest kind of change, according to me, what will have is happening. So today, we all of us have two roles. One, as a role as a leader, and then a role as a follower. And for all of both of this, I think there'll be a paradigm shift when you do it. And as I said, looking at it, what we do as leaders is going to be, even more important, because you're not going to be able to now sort of have luxuries of making too many mistakes when your resources are today going to be crunched. The other, I think, broad change is, and I think Jagriti alluded to this already, is that we have to think about how do we communicate. The whole method of communication, mode of communication. I think this whole COVID world, this pandemic has changed the way we will communicate with each other. I mean, you are particularly gets important when you are when you're in a room. You follow body language. You have informal chats. Everything is fine, but I think we've got to figure out through this method, how do you build consensus when you want to? How do I change? I mean, if Vikas and I have a different view in a particular matter, sitting, staring at the computer and staring at you virtually, will I be able to, how easy is it going to be to change perspectives, build in consensus? I think, to me, the two fundamental, of course, and I completely, agree with what Jagriti was saying, that empathy, compassion is going to be very important. But when I was thinking about it, and I thought, these two, to me, I would sort of think jumps out as things which are going to be very important. I think they have never been a more compelling, purpose for all of us to therefore come together to find a solution that will benefit everyone. So now we will have to look at even more, and I think we always talked about it, but even more we will start thinking about keeping aside individual performances and looking at collective outcomes. I think these are the couple of aspects which I would say is, and again, it's not just for a legal leader, but it is for all leaders. I think this is applicable. So to me, because that's what I would sort of begin with.
Right. Are you getting support also as a leadership team? Because the kind of points that Jagriti mentioned, you're mentioning, wartime leader, empathy, trust, working with a team. It's not easy. Those skills don't come naturally to everyone. So are you working as a leadership team as well to look at how do we communicate with team? Because you can't see people face to face. You may not always understand what they're going through. So how do you help such, this kind of environment, build on those kind of skills?
So, I mean, I don't have an immediate answer to that. And I think, the point is, because that today we were almost legislatively, regulatorily, legally compelled to stay at home. Tomorrow may come a time where, it doesn't become so compulsory to stay at home and work from home. but it will perhaps become the way to do it. What I'm basically alluding to, that the whole concept of how we lead, the whole concept of how we communicate, how we build consensus, all of this we have to do a lot of unlearning of how we do it today to how we will do it in future. Have we cracked it? I mean, do I have a view on how to do that? I don't. But I think I just believe that it's a good start to perhaps at least identify that these are some of the aspects we've got to deal with. How we'll come to there, not yet sorted out. And I think when we get back and when this becomes the norm, I guess we will got to, we innovate very well, as human beings, and we will, find a solution.
Super. Okay, Jigar, let me throw that one over to you as well. More about, how do you manage team and people, at this moment in time? Because I know you'll have, a small legal team that you're working with, but you're also working across the business. So how do you manage some of these kind of issues from a practical day-to-day basis?
Thanks, Vikas. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Let me just tell you about my personal experience. I've been working from home or working remotely for over 5 years now. So I do about at least 1 week every month on average, working remotely. I do it from London. When I started doing it, I used to go into the office of my my London office. What I realized is that, when I used to go to the London office, it was great to meet people, connect with people, but essentially in terms of work, I was a bit of an island, just using offices and the office infrastructure. Eventually, I reasoned that there was no point dealing with the London tube system every day, and there was no incremental advantage in doing that. So for a while, I've been working from home. The other thing is, in Western offices, you see very frequently a lot of people work on flexi hours, and often people would work, whether they're fathers or mothers, they would work on average, let's say, 1 day from home every week. So I think that, those kind of things are probably not as common in India. Now we're obviously facing a new paradigm. And I think there will be a cultural shift. Niranjan spoke about the human frailties and the need to, meet each other and socialize. And I think that, I don't think that can be completely done away with. It's fine for, a few people in office to be away working remotely. But how do you, can you shift from here to a paradigm where, pretty much everybody's working dispersed and working remotely and connecting through technology? So I think that's really a question we will have to see how that plays out. I definitely think there's going to be a shift to, a shift to flexi working that's coming after this phase is over. In terms of how we're dealing with it in my organization, it's everything that people have talked about. You have to innovate, and you have to accept the new reality. And what that means is, firstly, we're dealing with pandemic, so health and safety first. People have, when people work from home, they have additional duties in this sort of environment where, either their spouse is also not working, or they have young children who are not going to school, or they have elderly parents who need support. So I think the first thing the organization has done is really assured people that, we have your back, and your health and safety and well-being is most important. So please focus on whatever you need to do from a family perspective. You don't have to be working from 9 to 6, for example. If in the middle of the day you need to be away for an hour or two, do that. And to the extent you need to, you make up for it, at your convenience. So I think that's the message that's gone out loud and clear to everyone. In addition to that, we have said to everyone, if you need to build some office infrastructure at home, if you need to go and buy a printer, I'm talking practically, granularly in how we're dealing with it. If you need to buy a printer from home, at home, or you need to take your computer or your laptop or your docking station, please do that. There's an allowance that's been provided for people to spend and take care of that. So and then we have weekly check-ins across larger teams, daily check-ins across the smaller teams, and keep the focus on FaceTime as much as we can. And the technology has really kicked in. Our technology teams have been superb, working 24/7 to make sure that everyone's connected and able. So I think all of that has worked very well. And honestly, I think that a lot of people feel that you're much more productive currently working from home, because then you don't have to deal with, you use your time judiciously. And that's the general feeling I get and I hear from people, that working from home can actually be quite efficient. I'll stop here. I think there's a paradigm shift that's happened. How sustainable that is, I think, is something we should debate.
Yeah. No, Navneet, let me come to you, because you're also someone that has teams spread geographically. So you're kind of more used to, how the things that we're getting used to in terms of work from home, work remotely, work with teams spread across different areas. You're more used to it. So more from the practical point of view, what kind of tips can you give the rest of the community about how to keep your team engaged, motivated, and looked after, when you can't be with them, physically on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, thanks, Vikas. So I think Jigar's comments reminded me of something. I think the last time I had my manager in the same time zone as me, forget office, was in 2005, right? So it's been many years, right, since. So you can say I've been working remotely for a while now. But I think what this pandemic is going to do is change I don't think it's going to be necessarily the black swan event that we all thought, right? It's not end of the world. I do see it accelerating certain things though, right? And this working remotely concept is probably one of those. There was an article in The Economist a few months ago which talked about how offices are over time becoming less and less relevant, right? And it's an early 18th century, 19th century concept, which is, according to them, beginning to look like a dad at a disco, right? I took offense at that because I have teenage kids, and I don't think I'll be out of place in a disco, but maybe that's correct, right? So I think the concept of working from home or working remotely has been going up from time to time. There is a gender. If you look at the data on it, there was a couple of IBM reports out on teleworking, they call it, which talks about how there's a difference in gender, how women look at it as opposed to men. The number is not as big as one would think, but usually speaking, teleworking or remote working has been the prerogative of the senior people, right? So the number is almost, I think it's double. So managers, I think about 12 to 20%, and this is a little old data, were happy to work from home before this, whereas individual contributors were half that, right? So there are these different aspects that work there. Now, how does this change the way you work, right? I think it goes back to the concept of the office. So if you look at the concept of the office, it's fundamentally an attempt to make sure that you have locked up, to put it mildly, your employees in one place, and you get an hourly return from them, right? So that 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, 40 hours a week, these are all terms you will see in employment agreements. So to a certain extent, you can argue that the whole concept of working was always about time and not anything else, right? And of course, the same article I'm referencing in The Economist basically talks about how people use that to their advantage, and coffee breaks, smoke breaks, newspaper reading, all that goes on, right? I think that whole model is in danger, right? And that model changes dramatically when it's a remote working environment. So performance management, how do we manage talent, changes completely. So it's no longer about, hey, I want Navneet in my office with me till 7 p.m. at night or 9 p.m. at night or whatever it is, right? I'm sure most lawyers on this call can have spent nights in the office. I have, definitely. I don't think it's about that anymore, right? It's about making sure that certain deliverables are delivered, right? And I think that is something, especially in our profession, will be a huge difference, right? Because we're not very good at drafting out what are the actual KPIs, what are the activities we want them to do. So I think that's becomes something in the medium term that all managers will struggle with, and all people will struggle with, firms will struggle with them. I think communication, as everybody has said, absolutely critical. You need to change the way you communicate. You need to make sure that they feel a level of psychological safety, they call it, right? So that even if you are making mistakes, it doesn't matter, somebody is there to protect you. There is the emotional aspect of it, absolutely critical right now, right? People are going through issues, right? There are employees who are probably facing COVID issues or other health problems, and trying to figure out how to handle small kids, big kids, adult kids through a normal working day, right? I mean, I know at our home, everything is upside down, right? You're running because the kids have classes, and you're trying to juggle that and make sure they're getting lunch and breakfast and everything else, and at the same time trying to get your work done. So I think the emotional aspects are absolutely important. I think one of the pieces that companies worry about, I mean, there is the trend in companies to talk about, hey, I want you in office because I want to get, paisa vasool, right? I want to make sure that you're working. I don't trust you, whatever be their own internal issues with it. I think there is a slight concern about how do you make sure that you are safeguarding the institutional knowledge in a company, right? And this happens most often in an informal environment, right? In the office, could happen formally as well, but it's usually informal. Some people argue that kind of informal discussion is the reason for the lack of diversity, right? So maybe there is a positive side to it. So organizations could worry about losing the institutional knowledge that we have gained. On the opposite side, maybe promotions and hiring will happen not because you look like someone, but because they are actually good at what they do. So I think there are these different aspects that pop up, and I'll stop there, right? But
cool. I'm gonna, Jagrati, I'll bring you back in. I know we kind of cut off earlier, but moving on from this conversation about what are you doing practically to support your team, I think what even Navneet's moved it on to is interesting in terms of how do you evaluate performance, results. So what do you think this phase we're going through? Some of these changes will become permanent. So how do you kind of understand, what are your team doing? What are the results? Support them in that manner. Because I know even when you were back at law firm, and even when I used to work as a chartered accountant at Anderson's, and it very much was, you've got to be there till very late and doing the hours. And I remember when I used to question it when I joined Anderson's, like, why do people do this? And they're like, keep quiet. We did it as partners. You've got to do it. It's just the way it is. And I think this could become some level of, it could support a paradigm shift that actually, no, it doesn't have to be the way it is. So what do you think, what kind of changes do you think this could bring going forward to the kind of working culture?
I think one of the key changes that we need to bring within our organizations, firstly, it's social and cultural. India has for very, very long placed a lot of premium on face time in the office. And back when I was a banking lawyer, if I left at 7 o'clock in the evening, people would say, is that a half day? That needs to change because globally, people work from home. Globally, it's an accepted way of working. And I think the lack of trust or accountability that may have existed previously, leading to the requirement of people being in the office, needs to go away. And for that, it's then building your team to be accountable for themselves. It's building the trust between the team and the leadership. It's also then creating an organization where performance is not determined by who's in the office and how much they appear to be working. So the metrics, the goals that you set, the manner in which the achievement of those goals are then measured, that itself needs to undergo a sea of change. I think that in order to also ensure that in this kind of environment, You have business priorities clearly identified. I also then identify who are your key resources who are going to be responsible for delivering those business priorities. And then you balance between figuring out who can work from home in the roles and responsibilities that they have, who needs to come into the office. Also, I think that there is value to human interaction, and therefore bringing in some kind of a rhythm of ensuring that our colleagues have the human touch. They have time scheduled where people will come into the office, whether it's by rotation, whether it's ensuring the management meets once a month, or whether it's ensuring the team meets at periodic intervals. I think planning the way ahead, after factoring in the things that we did, the things that we need to change, and how we change that, bringing within the organization even these cultural changes is going to be key to how we move forward.
Yeah. And do you think any of this could be made permanent? Like some of the ways you're having to adapt right now to support your team, but do you see any of that becoming a permanent feature of the way organizations and departments will change in the future?
I don't think everybody can work from home all the time. So certain groups can work from home all the time, but I work for an organization where the sales function is key. They are working in a new way. So for them, face-to-face meetings are important, but they're learning to do that on video conferences now, instead of going into the client's office and meeting them. But sometimes there is a value add to actually going into the client's office. So in certain roles, we will need to think about whether or not certain employees need to go into the office, certain employees need to go meet clients. So it's not an absolute that everybody can work from home permanently, but I do think that this is a great inflection point for us where a lot of people can start working from home a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things that could come out of this, because even I know as a managing director, company owner, and even when I talk to lawyers, there's always a trust factor that goes through your mind when it's work from home. That even if I have teammates saying, I want to work from home today, and we've got teams around the world, that there's always a question mark as a leader until it's really ingrained in your culture that, are you really going to be doing, what Navneet said, the hours? Are you going to give me my 8 hours a day? I'm just trying to look at, does this situation, like now we've been locked down for 2 months, and I've got used to it, so I'm enjoying working from home. Some of my team aren't, as you're right. So will this help break down that psychological barrier to having teams work from home and working a new way? So
I think so. I think that when people feel that they're also being trusted more, that they feel that they're being more productive, what is the difference between somebody working from home and somebody being in the office and going down for 6 smoke breaks and 7 chai breaks? I've told my team that I don't care about whether they're online 24/7, 365. So long as the work gets done, so long as the deliverables are met, so long as the turnaround times are high, that's all I care about.
Okay. So what do you think, because I think this is a good, by accident, we've got this good test of moving to a work from home remote culture, but especially from an Indian perspective, what are the kind of hindrances that we're seeing at the moment that will stop us really adopting work from home, remote working, on a more full scale, larger level? Jigar, I'll throw that one to you first.
Okay, so you ask about hindrances. Let me just talk about drivers. Let me just talk about drivers for a second.
Sure.
I think that for a country like India, this could be a complete game changer. We deal with huge problems of urbanization and density in our large cities. There's a cost issue as well, and there's the issue of bringing more people into workforce. So from all of those counts, I think the policymakers, what I can kind of read between the lines, is that I think the policymakers are thinking this is how India could really progress. If we allow people to be wherever they are, maybe it will ease the pressure on the large cities. And we've seen the problems with migrants. And I'm not saying for a moment that those are the kind of jobs that can be remotely performed. But I think that for professional services industry, which is very large for India, if it were possible to allow people to work from home, and there's a cultural shift, it will certainly bring down costs and make us even more economically stronger. And also this issue about bringing more people into workforce. I think culturally, and I think Jagriti alluded to this, we do lose a lot of people, especially working women, at certain stage in their life cycle, and quite often they don't come back. And it may not apply to Jagriti, but it will apply to a lot of people that they don't come back into the workforce. There are also a bunch of other people which we can bring into workforce. For example, retired judges, right? If we move to a sort of an online dispute resolution or arbitration or mediation system, then a lot of the knowledge and wisdom that our retired judges have, and we lose because at that particular point in their life cycle, they're probably not prepared to locate to just for economic well-being. They want to go back to wherever they came from. And if you could still utilize them, that would be a game changer. So I think there are lots of drivers for why this change could be good. What are the hindrances? I think the key hindrance will be, one is technology. Two is this need to hold workers to captivity, which Navneet mentioned. I think there needs to be a cultural change. If that cultural change happens and we learn to trust people and we focus on performance as opposed to accounting for hours. I moved out of private practice, and one of the key drivers for me was not to have to do timesheets or whatever the current version is. I think that using monitoring tools or technology enabled monitoring tools, I don't think is the way forward, because the last thing I would want is for you to know exactly what I'm doing at any point in time and how many hours I spent on the screen, because that's not really a good measure. So I think there will be hindrances, but I think the reality is that this new paradigm will allow people to relax a little bit, feel a little bit less guilty, and that will introduce a lot of flexibility in how people see people getting together for work purposes.
Just before we get Jagriti onto that one, Nilanjan, what are your views in terms of any additional drivers? But more importantly, what are the hindrances for India to take advantage of this potential paradigm shift?
So I actually, was quiet because I sort of have a different view with what is being so far discussed. Specifically to the context of a legal team, and I would say for a lawyer like I am working for a bank. Look, let's you would have noticed that banking in India has and through this time has been an essential service. So which means we've kept the banking operations going. We have, thanks to we already had a very advanced and strong IT infrastructure, which enabled thousands and thousands of people to get access to our systems through VPN. Thanks to Navneet's company in Cisco, we've been able to get onto a lot of these calls, and we have done a lot of these calls and virtually met each other. We've done these calls, which are generally to figure out what one is reading or what one is watching on Netflix and what kind of movies you're doing and how are you keeping yourself fit. We've done a bit of those. We've done our reviews and all of that. And we have a large section of our bank who's out there in the branches trying to serve all of you, because we have to, keep providing service. As a legal team, however, we decided, because safety of employees was paramount, we realized that right now, the legal team does not need to be there, and they could perhaps right now operate from home, and they were all given access to operate from home. However, I think, there are, if you really look at it in the real world, that there are, as I again allude to the conversation I had, if you were to do a structured transaction, I can't imagine that you will be doing a brainstorming to do a structured transaction, virtuing. How will you, maybe people are doing it. I'm saying we've got to figure it out. I don't know how that will work out, and we've not experienced it. But I wonder how you can really sit down and brainstorm. Can you focus, when you are sitting at home, staring at a computer, with many demons in your head, and everything happening. There is a reason why we are in office, because we need focused, concentrated time. We need to be with each other, exchange ideas, and therefore do it. So I think I don't see that. Yes, will it become a choice for people sometimes, as Jigar said, that sometimes people are given this option. You can work thrice a week from outside, from home. You can do rotational kind of systems. But I am very curious to see how this as a permanent solution would work. How do you do a litigation? How do you prepare for a litigation? How much can I print at home? And what does that do to the client privacy? How much can I print papers and ensure that that paper is not, you're going to virtually, and then, look, I live in Bombay. I have a, modest small apartment. I can't, tell my family that, this is out of bound, this is locked, and I come out of the room. We share rooms. How much can you, so when you're doing, when you're doing things like real world litigation, when you're doing a strategic, discussion, when you're doing a structuring, I find it very difficult how these would work, other than, of course, the other fact that we believe that client information, privacy is very important. That is again very important. I'm sure that people will figure out. We all have our IT rules. We will follow IT rules. We'll become more and more. In our bank, we've started seeing a lot more of what our IT leader calls it, pinching model. So you have this whole thing about protect, detect, and respond. So we started doing a lot more of what they call pinching. So you start attacking your own system through phishing attacks, etc., to see how people react. So then you try and become a little more sort of aware of these IT issues. So I really it's again there is one. I am not of a believer that we should move the pendulum from one side of saying come when you can, go away when you can. It is fully task-based. Because what happens in that is that you suddenly see that people who are efficient, because you don't have the luxury, you've got to deliver on your task. You've got to deliver as the business would need. 3 months down the line, everybody, all of this will become a very nice conversation, but you'll have to still deliver on the numbers. And then what you'll tend to do is you tend to then go to the person who turns it around quickly. And as a matter of fact, therefore, there are 5 of the others who are not that efficient, and you just let them fall by the wayside. How do you match to see that the overall efficiency of the team is at an average, and everybody is at least operating at that level? Because there will be spikes of somebody operating at 120%, and then there are who are operating at 40%. And that's...
Yeah, that challenge will be there whether you're in a virtual world or a physical world. So we always have that challenge. It's lesser.
It's lesser because when you are in the virtual world, if I'm sitting down and you and I are sitting down trying to sort of come out with let's say, and going back to my structuring example, there is some stuff I want you to do, and sitting there you have to do. And then if I know that you're really not doing that, see, because what happens is that it is far more quicker. And again, that's the way we are used to.
Yeah,
God knows, maybe
a shift there, because you all have your own gut instinct, even working remotely, of who's working, who's not working, who's delivering. Because you'll be able to just sense that because of the responses coming back. But I want to pick up on the data security stuff, because I think we've also got questions flowing through around that. And I think that is a big, well, I don't know if it's hindrance, but it's a big issue that we should be debating. So example, which I'll throw over to Navneet first, obviously because he's at Cisco, but obviously there's, London, you had trouble with Zoom. We know there's issues coming about, do we use Zoom? There was big issues around this data side, and especially given your lawyers and the point you mentioned in London about how much can I print at home in a shared space. So Navneet, this is a big question mark. Like, how do we continue to function as lawyers when we've got these big data privacy issues still to look after in a work from home concept?
Right. No, I think if I look at it, and I'll try and classify these into what I call infrastructure issues, right, to a certain extent. And I don't mean infrastructure in the old sense, right, roads or bridges or whatever. I think what the problem is many times, and for those of us who have kids old enough, for example, right, doing online classes, you can see that already, right? And the basic problem is how many of our employees, for example, have good fiber internet connections, right? It's so subjective depending on where you are and where you're living. So I think that's kind of like the very basic level issue that you have, right? And this is going to get worse, right? Because I mean, the trend has always been to increase. I think there's some data out there which says in 2022, there will be more traffic created in that one calendar year than was created since the birth of the internet, right? So there'll be more data coming onto the systems everywhere in 1 year than you have had in the last, whatever, 20, 25, right? And so that's going to change things a lot. But I think from a organization standpoint or a corporation standpoint, and Nilanjan referred to that a bit, I think and I'm going to do a bit of, I'm going to make it sound like I'm not doing marketing here, but the issue is because of the sudden change that's happened, right? Many organizations have been forced to move things to their systems and use tools and devices which are often not what I call enterprise grade, right? So Zoom is a good example of it. You can use Zoom, right? You can get Zoom bombed. You can lose, all your data is sitting in China, so it's probably not relevant or whatever. There's a reason the G20 summit is held on WebEx, right? There's a reason board meetings are held on WebEx, because there is certain level of security built into the damn thing, right? This is not some ex-employee going off and doing something on his own, which is what Zoom is, by the way. But that's the end of my anti-Zoom rant. But keeping that aside for a minute, that's just an example, right? I mean, you have insecure devices out there. You have identity issues, right? How do you make sure the right person is logging in? Do you have twofold verification of access, right? None of those things have actually been thought about. And I think cybersecurity remains a big issue, right? You think the 2021, again, another piece of data, there's a firm called Cybersecurity Ventures, which, so this is not Cisco saying it, right? It's a third-party security agency. And they talk about how the damage caused by cyber crimes by that time will be approximately $6 trillion a year, right? Now, $6 trillion is the total right now of the supposed revenue from illegal drug trade around the world, right? So all the Colombias and everything else you put together and you calculate the value of that drug supply, that's $6 trillion. It's more than the value of all damage caused by all natural disasters in any given 1 year, right? So there is, and the challenge that this creates for us from a security standpoint is the attack area increases, right? So till now you were in the one office, you're probably having a few servers, your switches were through one area, you could easier to protect. Now you're all over the place, you have employees working from everywhere. So the attack surface area has increased, and that increases the risk. So I think those are some areas that we'll have to talk through. Data privacy is another big issue, right? How do you make sure that data is protected? Particularly in countries which don't necessarily have a robust data protection law. We're sitting in one right now, right? There is also the other concern about on the opposite side, right? Are we allowing surveillance to increase? We have the Arogya Setu app issue running around here in India, and this is kind of an interesting one, right? it's kind of surveillance into your own body that you're trying to do. And by the way, what in India, we have our own little angles to this issue, but this is there everywhere. I mean, you land in Korea today from outside, they will put an ankle bracelet on you. Okay, so it's not just asking you to download an app, and they have been very successful, by the way, in controlling the spread of the pandemic, right? So I think these are all issues we have to think through. But I think for an organization per se, the biggest issue right now is how do you shift and how do you make sure that you're changing yourself and giving your employees the security that's required. And it's not easy, right? It's a very complicated area.
And so essentially, it sounds like obviously we don't have the answers. It's something we've got to think through, but it's something that should be taken very seriously by business and the in-house department, that we're not prepared, especially in India right now, to move to this kind of work from home culture because of all these issues. And it sounds
because,
like,
if I may just add one thing at the risk of trying to sound knowledgeable, is that I also heard that the attackers are also doing social profiling of all of us, because what I understand, and I heard somewhere that things like your smart television has a low level computing device, and we are using the same platform for using our whatever, watching our Netflix, as well as the same Wi-Fi platform to do our work. And there is perhaps a risk that through this, there is a sort of a social attack, which with the social profiling it will happen. Is going to be a hacking into the system, which in an office environment is perhaps far better and far better sort of firewall. So the other risk is from there. The way our lifestyles have gone about. We use things which are now suddenly like a mini computer. So that's the other way which I think as a trend is developing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a quick data point on that, right? So we have a solution called Talos, right, which kind of protects. So you only hear about cybersecurity issues when they actually blow up in your face, right? You don't hear about the number of attacks that and this is pre-COVID, this is your standard enterprise server, right? Say a bank or a investment company or whatever, right? The number of attacks in a day that Cisco stops, or the Cisco solution stops, is more than the number of Google searches done in a day globally. Okay, so this is an established industry. There are people who are figuring out ways to automate and attack you, and yeah, that it's a huge risk, but nothing to do with COVID as such. But it's there.
Yeah, but like I said, like even Nilanjan was alluding to, it's just going to increase during this phase where we have less strong systems in place. I want to move the conversation off, like have actually a jump in terms of, obviously working styles are different now in this work from home environment. We're having to get used to our teams being more productive in a more virtual, dispersed manner. I want to move on to kind of, does that accelerate any trends that we're seeing with your relationship to external counsel and law firms? Because what we've seen, again, as the in-house department has evolved over the last decade, we've seen a kind of change in the way you work with your law firm and your external counsel. It used to very much be managing partner knows the owner of the business, they get the work, and there's a very comfortable relationship there, and the work continues. But as in-house counsels become more sophisticated, teams do more work, the work you then seek from your law firm partner is kind of just fragmenting into different areas. One is commoditized work, because you don't have the bandwidth, and the other is more strategic advisory work, because you may not have that in-house technical expertise. Do you see this kind of lockdown period accelerating that trend of in-house teams becoming much more self-reliant, more robust in how you work with external counsel? Jigad, I'll throw that one over to you first.
The way we work, we don't use law firms only for, we use them because we need to have bandwidth. We don't resource internally, at least that's the current sort of approach. we don't do a simple calculation of is it costlier for me to go outside than to have somebody internally, because I think for us the work requirements will ebb and flow, and they'll be specific to transactions, so we use law firms really for bandwidth and everything else, including advisory work and actually getting some legal sort of technical support. However, we're probably not typical of a legal consumer. I do see that if there is a paradigm shift, and people will work from home, and that gets accentuated for professional service providers, the whole concept of a law firm, a big law firm, which is that you have lawyers working in captivity, if you like, in one office together, and that's the advantage of going to a large law firm. I think if there is a shift in how lawyers, if the lawyers are dispersed, then there is a question around, what is the optimal way in which lawyers organize themselves to provide collective service. So I think that collective versus physical dispersal could lead to a number of changes. It's difficult to say for now, but I can imagine that in any case, when you go to a law firm, you go into a law firm with a specific idea of the individuals you want in that law firm to do your work. So you anyway focus on individuals, particularly in terms of the law firms in India. And will that trend to focus on individuals also accentuate this dispersal and how law firms organize themselves? I think that's a question mark.
Jagrati, I'll throw it over to you next. But so Jigar, do you think the fact that, because a lot of Indian law firms are still, quite archaic in the way they operate. So they haven't developed the way Western law firms have, and there is this still very kind of control and command culture. So, like now, and work from home is not an Indian law firm kind of culture, but now because of this, Jagrati, I'll throw it to you. Do you think we could then see the kind of whole a bigger disruption happening to Indian law firms because talented lawyers are now away from their command and chief and being able to operate in a more efficient, less controlled manner?
I think that's an entrepreneurial streak that will depend on the individual, right? I will go to a particular lawyer and not necessarily a law firm. So when I go to a law firm, it's because there is one lawyer in that law firm who I trust to be responsible and whose high quality advice I value. That's not going to go away. Now, whether or not that lawyer then chooses and has that resilience to believe that they can do this on their own and they don't need to be under the aegis of a different law firm, that's a call they're going to need to take. But I think the other piece that is going to be critical is adopting technology. And I think India lags behind where legal technology is concerned. We haven't evolved the way our counterparts in most other countries have. And I think one of the key elements that is going to change for whether it's a law firm, whether it's in-house counsel, whether it's individual legal practitioners, adopting technology is going to be key. That's one. But the other aspect is also a lot of times the cost of technology is a deterrent to most people. So whether or not people are going to hesitate to go away because they won't have access to the resources and they don't have the technology to then drive through is going to be a bit of a differentiator as well.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to say, so two ways to look at it, right? And I think obviously we are looking into the crystal ball a bit here. One, I think if as a client and as a department, if I am forced to move away from the hourly concept and look at ways to move to a deliverable-based concept, right? So I disagree a bit with Nilanjan, right? I think the fact that you can and you have to change the way you manage your team to moving away to certain specific deliverables that need to come from them. I think that's a mindset shift. And I disagree with Nilanjan, because I don't think, I think if I don't need a person in my office to figure out whether they're doing their job or not. I really don't actually care about that. But the reality of it from an overall perspective is, if I'm forcing my team to move to a different model, right? Why will I not use that model on the law firm? So in other words, why will I not use the same things I've learned in developing my work and developing how I track it to the law firm, right? So I think that will be a huge change. The second thing I think, and this one I think, slightly a divergence with Jagriti, though I think most of our points are well made. When I started working, one of the biggest problems to stopping a new advocate from joining litigation was the fact that there was no income, right? And that problem still exists to a large extent. It's not changed. But there were other expenses that went with it, right? So you had to have a chamber somewhere, right? You had to rent an office. You had to buy a library, right? And that time the costs were for a new startup lawyer, pretty expensive, right? I think some of those things, provided you have technology coming in and provided you have some new websites coming up, which have all the bare acts up there, you have got case laws out on the internet. Yes, they are expensive, they're not cheap, but they're not necessarily as expensive as buying a library, right? So similar to setting up of companies or setting up of technology companies where we, in the old days, Cisco's competition or HP's competition was another big behemoth, right? You needed that financial muscle to be able to beat us. That has changed there, right? I mean, our biggest worry is two kids sitting in a garage somewhere, because they could come up with some idea which could completely disrupt your business model. I think there is a possibility here in the legal profession for younger, energetic, more talented people. I think it's the bar is set a little lower financially. So you may find more folks going out and becoming entrepreneurs. And like Jagriti and Jigar mentioned, right? It's the lawyer you're hiring. I'm not duty bound to go and hire a law firm, right? And so if you can cut down your costs and you can go out there and do it yourself, I think you will find you'll find a sea change in the profession.
So I just want to make one point on in favor of the large organization model, and that can evolve slightly different to where we are. It can be more remote. It doesn't have to be physical. That can evolve in a different way. But we do value going to a large law firm for a number of reasons, right? Apart from the individual talent, we value the market knowledge they have built by reason of having looked at this problem in more than one instance. They just know exactly how market works. They will know how the regulators work in a regulated industry. They would have the right template. The quality of template is good. Their junior lawyers are well trained. All of these things are absolutely critical. So any new organizational change from where we are today will have to account for those for it to be successful. I don't think it can be simply a case of a smart lawyer sitting in one room and giving you the best service he can, because our business is all about making the right decisions and taking the right judgment calls. And it's just more than a great lawyer who's technically competent that will do the trick.
Yep. Well, I think we'll move on to a different subject now, but I think it also sounds like what Jagdi was mentioning, that the entrepreneurial spirit will kick in. And as we've seen many young startups in the last few years, this could be this could also be a game changer for more lawyers and a better way of delivering legal advice to the counsel, also to in-house counsel also coming up during this phase. I want to again completely shift course, because we've had some interesting points about the whole work from home culture, especially in India, and mental wellness being one of those points. I'm going to ask Navneet first, because he's got to jump off because he needs to get back to a WebEx call instead. So Navneet first, do you want to just talk about, it's a big issue in the legal community, and I'm sure this phase is not helping as well. So what are your kind of viewpoints, and how do we tackle the mental wellness question from a lawyer's point of view?
Well, I think the really interesting part about this, I think after the whole pandemic and the shutdown started, right, was we had a team call, and we do it very regularly. But and the team call, basically, I went in without an agenda, right, on purpose. So I said, no agenda, we're just going to sit and talk, right, and tell me about what's happening, and let's share stuff. And the conversation so quickly became about the philosophy of working, right? And these are, my team is largely a bunch of senior lawyers from across the region, right? Different backgrounds, different countries, everything else. Really, really interesting to see people talking about how this whole event has made them rethink their priorities in life, right? Sometimes you're the hamster on the wheel, and the wheel has suddenly come to a stop, right? Or has slowed down, and you get a chance to think. So I think there are some positives that can come out of this from an emotional perspective. That said, people are going through different situations right now, right, in their personal lives. There are some trying to handle the home life along with the work life, right? There are others who are going through health issues, right? And it's a very, very disruptive time. And so the approach is largely the same, which is, how do you make sure you are engaged with them? I think job one, when you're trying to work with someone or you're trying to encourage your team member, is job one is to make sure you get them to feel that you actually know them or that you are really interested in them, right? That's job one. Second, and after that, you work on building out plans for them that are according to their likes, right? But here you have the additional part where I've told my managers or the other lawyers in the team, right now, it's all about you, right? So you want to come and talk? Come and talk. I'm not going to get into this thing about performance or what's happening with this deal or whatever. Let's talk just about yourself. So every call will end with a 5-10 minute conversation about how they are, how their families are, how their parents are. And so that just tries to build this level of trust there from that perspective. We are also doing many things together as a team. So we have some fun on something called WebEx Teams, which is like a messaging platform that we have. We had competitions there. We had pictures of senior lawyers put up, and questions were asked about what they were thinking, and it was kind of funny. We have yoga classes online. We have what's the other one? Zumba classes also going on. So there is a fair bit of that happening, but I think from a leadership standpoint, the main issue is to make sure that you are communicating, right? Communicating more than you would normally, but more importantly, also that you are available, right? So open coffee afternoons or alcohol afternoons, if you will, right? Afternoons for us, evenings for others in Asia, where you just get together and you chat and try and figure out what's happening. I think that's a piece that we have been forcing people to do more of, right? And I think that's probably really the only way you can try to work through this, because it is a stressful time.
Jagati, I know, Navneet, you've got to drop off now.
I will leave, but thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you to all my panelists and all the attendees.
Great, thanks, Navneet. So we're just going to take a few more minutes, but Jagati, I'll move that over to you about how do we deal with that as an issue for the legal fraternity.
I think firstly, this is a fantastic time for us as a society to move away from the taboo of mental health issues that has haunted us all our lives, right? Historically, it's not something that's discussed very openly. People don't get help for it. But I think that at least from what I've been seeing, there's a greater ask for help. I think there's greater conversations happening about it. In the first town hall that we hosted, once we went into lockdown, I had this psychiatrist, Dr. Chavda, who came in and spoke to our entire sales force and the entire office, basically, the entire town hall, talking about mental health, talking about the challenges that people are going through. And it was so well received that then we rolled it out, yesterday in fact, and we had a session for customers and the industry as a whole, We had about 450 registrations. I think 250 people showed up. The recording has been sent to everybody else, but it was immensely well received. So I think there is definitely a need and an ask for help. People want guidance, people want to ask questions, people want to know how to better cope in these circumstances. But I think it's not just about now. Organizations themselves, a lot of them already have those mechanics in place. We have an organization that is always there for any employee who needs any sort of counseling and help with mental health. Organizations need to be more proactive in adopting this for employees. That's one. Secondly, I go back to the first point, empathy. For all of us, whether it's with our colleagues, with our teams, with our bosses, I think empathy is key to then bridging that gap between stress and mental health and making sure that we're there for other people and other people are there for us. And organizations have been good. I think some organizations have been good and proactive about letting employees know that they're cared for. But I think there's still a lot that needs to be done here in our industry to take it forward. I'm not, honestly, I must admit, I'm not sure about what practices law firms have, but I think that the hours that lawyers keep, the kind of high stress jobs that we have, it's definitely important for us to pause. If it's meditation, if it's mindfulness, if it's yoga, if it's talking to a mental health expert, whatever it is that we need to do, it is so important that we go do it ourselves. And if we need support, I think as a community, we need to come together and do this better. So Vikas, one of the suggestions I have, maybe our next IDEX session should be one on mental health.
Yeah, we've just made note of that, like how, so we'll talk to you afterwards actually and look at how do we do a session around mental health for the community. Cool. Jigard, any viewpoints on that?
No, I think I think this lockdown obviously is forced, and mental health becomes a bigger issue. And I think it's an issue, to your point, Jagat, is very well made. It's an issue generally, but I think it's a bigger issue right now because when people are forced into something, I think it's a different paradigm. And in the context of what we were discussing about how things might change, again, if things change by choice, then it's less of an issue, right? When you're forced to live in a lockdown, it's different. And then you choose to work from home at a different point in time when the lockdown is over. I think that's a different paradigm. That's one. Secondly, Jagriti mentioned empathy. I think the other thing I would mention is gratitude, right? Empathy and gratitude. Important to remind ourselves that we are very, very lucky compared to a lot of people. We should remember that and be grateful for everything that we have, and the fact that we're able to continue working, and our organizations are supporting us in every possible way. So we should be grateful.
Great. Nilanjan, any thoughts on this as a topic?
No, I mean, I think you've covered it. Yeah.
Okay, super. I'm going to wrap up because we are 15 minutes over, and I know lawyers also never rest, so everyone's got busy days ahead of them. But really want to thank the panel for being part of this important discussion. And I think we're already starting to see that this is, while it is very stressful, it's psychologically, isn't easy for people. There will be kind of opportunities and a potential paradigm shift, especially from an Indian context in the way we do work, because I think trust has always been an issue here. It's more developed in Western markets, but I think what we're seeing already from the kind of tips you're giving, that it's a good opportunity to kind of change some of the ways we have been working to date. So I really want to thank you all for taking the time out to be part of this discussion. Thank you.